on September 11th, 2001. It was a clear Tuesday morning in New York City. People were commuting to work. Children were heading to school. The world seemed ordinary, safe, normal. But within minutes, that normal world would shatter. At 8:46 a.m., a jetliner slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 17 minutes later, a second plane hit the South Tower live on television. The unthinkable was happening in real time, and the entire world was watching. By the end of that day, nearly 3,000 people would be dead. The Twin Towers would be reduced to rubble. The Pentagon would be burning. And a quiet field in Pennsylvania would mark the site of one of the most heroic acts in American history. This is not just a story about buildings falling. It's the story of chaos, of fear, of courage, and of loss. It's the story of ordinary people caught in extraordinary moments. And it all happened in less than 2 hours. In this video, you'll see the entire 9/11 timeline, minute by minute. From the first impact, to the desperate evacuations, to the final collapse. Every critical moment, every decision, every act of bravery. Because 9/11 wasn't just another news event. It was the day that changed everything. Travel, security, war, even the way we think about safety and freedom. And yet, behind the history are the human stories. The firefighters who ran toward danger. The passengers who fought back on Flight 93. The survivors who carry the memory to this very day. But before we dive in, hit the subscription button to always get amazing contents on Trendify, because if you don't, you may not have access to them. Because Trendify is always here for top events, from true crime stories to historical contents and many more. Always remember to like, comment, and share, because at Trendify your service is our priority. More than 2 decades later, the images are still unforgettable. The emotions are still raw, and the lessons are still with us. This is the story of 9/11, minute by minute, as it happened. And it all began with a single plane. The morning of September 11th, 2001 began without warning of what was to come. In New York City, the sky was a flawless blue, the kind of crisp, late summer morning that felt ordinary and reassuring. Temperatures hovered around the mid-60s. It was perfect weather. Thousands of people poured into Lower Manhattan. Office workers filled the elevators of the World Trade Center. Vendors set up food carts on busy sidewalks. Tourists snapped photos of the skyline, unaware that in just a short time, those towers would be burning. Across the Hudson River, commuters drove into the city. The subways were packed. Wall Street traders rushed toward another day of business. Everything felt routine. But above this normal morning, something else was happening. Quietly, invisibly, and fatally. For commercial airplanes had already been hijacked. At 7:59 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 left Boston Logan Airport, heading for Los Angeles. At 8:14 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 also departed Boston, bound for Los Angeles. At 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 took off from Washington Dulles, aiming for Los Angeles. And at 8:42 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 left Newark International Airport, on its way to San Francisco. All 4 flights were heavy with fuel for cross-country travel, and all 4 flights had been targeted by terrorists with a deadly plan. At this point, no one on the ground had any idea. Families were saying goodbye at departure gates. Airline crews were beginning what they thought would be routine trips. Passengers were settling into their seats, adjusting tray tables, and flipping through magazines. But somewhere around 8:14 a.m., on Flight 11, the first signs of trouble appeared. The plane stopped responding normally to air traffic controllers. Within minutes, the hijackers had taken control. By 8:20 a.m., flight attendants on board were desperately trying to alert authorities. They reported stabbings, a hijacking, and a deadly situation in the cabin. It was confusion and terror at 30,000 feet. Still, on the ground, life continued as normal. In the Twin Towers, morning meetings were underway. Coffee shops bustled. On Wall Street, the opening bell was minutes away. But at 8:46 a.m., everything changed. American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center between the 93rd and 99th floors. The explosion sent fire and debris across the New York skyline. At first, confusion filled the air. Some thought it was a small plane, an accident, perhaps a terrible mistake. Television cameras rushed to the scene, showing live images of the burning tower. People stared at their screens, horrified but uncertain. But in just 17 minutes, that uncertainty would vanish. Because this was no accident, and the world was about to realize it. At 9:03 a.m., a second plane appeared on live television, heading straight for the South Tower. American Airlines Flight 11 crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The impact tears through floors 93 to 99. The building erupts in flames. Glass, steel, and burning jet fuel rain down on the streets below. For the people inside the tower, everything changes instantly. Stairwells fill with smoke. Elevators are destroyed. Thousands begin scrambling for exits, while others are trapped above the crash zone, cut off from rescue. On the streets of Lower Manhattan, crowds gather in shock. Some believe it's a terrible accident. Others suspect something more sinister. News channels break into regular programming, broadcasting live images of smoke billowing from the tower. But within minutes, the truth becomes undeniable. United Airlines Flight 175 slams into the South Tower of the World Trade Center between the 77th and 85th floors. This time, the impact happens live on television. The fireball explodes outward. The shock spreads instantly across the world. This is no accident. This is a coordinated attack. Inside the South Tower, chaos reigns. Some offices had already begun evacuating after seeing the North Tower burning. But now, panic spreads. Thousands rush for the stairwells. Others are trapped above the impact zone. Outside, sirens wail as firefighters, police, and paramedics flood into Lower Manhattan. They run toward danger, not away from it, knowing full well what might happen. Just as the nation's eyes remain fixed on New York, American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The impact tears through the western side of the building, killing 125 people inside, along with all 64 passengers and crew on board. Smoke rises from the heart of America's military command. The symbol of U.S. defense is burning. At this moment, America is under full-scale attack. In New York, just 56 minutes after being struck, the South Tower begins to give way. At 9:59 a.m., it collapses in a massive roar of dust, steel, and concrete. Crowds watching from the streets scream in horror. A massive gray cloud engulfs Lower Manhattan, turning day into night. Firefighters, police officers, and civilians are buried in debris. Many never make it out. For those still inside the North Tower, the sound of the collapse shakes the building to its core. They realize time is running out. Meanwhile, high above Pennsylvania, the passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 93 make a fateful choice. The plane, hijacked and headed toward Washington, is believed to be targeting either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. But the passengers, having learned of the attacks in New York via phone calls, decide to fight back. They storm the cockpit, battling the hijackers in a desperate attempt to regain control. The struggle is fierce. In the chaos, the plane crashes into a quiet field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing everyone aboard. Their sacrifice prevents another devastating strike on Washington, D.C. They are remembered as heroes. Back in New York, the unthinkable happens again. At 10:28 a.m., 102 minutes after the first impact, the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. The massive structure crumbles floor by floor, sending another enormous dust cloud racing through the city. In less than 2 hours, both towers are gone. Symbols of American strength reduced to rubble and ash. From New York to Washington to Pennsylvania, the attacks unfold in real time, shocking not just America, but the entire world. People around the globe are glued to their televisions, radios, and computers. The timeline is etched into memory. 8:46 a.m., North Tower struck. 9:03 a.m., South Tower struck. 9:37 a.m., Pentagon struck. 9:59 a.m., South Tower collapses. 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 crashes in Pennsylvania. 10:28 a.m., North Tower collapses. In just under 2 hours, nearly 3,000 people are killed. Thousands more are injured. First responders risk everything, many paying the ultimate price. The scale of the devastation is almost beyond comprehension. And yet, even as the towers fell, stories of courage were already being written. Ordinary people became heroes. Firefighters climbed toward flames. Strangers carried strangers to safety. Passengers on Flight 93 made an impossible choice to save countless others. Because even in the darkest hours, humanity shined. Behind every headline of September 11th, there are thousands of personal stories. Stories of fear, stories of survival, stories of unimaginable bravery. As thousands rushed out of the Twin Towers, thousands of others ran in. Firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical teams charged into the chaos, carrying heavy gear up smoke-filled stairwells, floor after floor, knowing the risk. Some made it only a few stories high. Others climbed past the 30th, the 40th, even the 50th floor. Many would never make it back down. Among them was FDNY Chief Peter Ganchi, who refused to leave his men behind, even as the towers began to crumble. His courage, like that of hundreds of others, cost him his life. In all, 343 firefighters, 60 police officers, and 8 paramedics were killed that day, the largest loss of emergency responders in U.S. history. But not all heroes were uniforms. Many were ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. In the North Tower, a man named Brian Clark, an executive on the 84th floor, helped lead a small group down a smoke-filled stairwell after the plane struck. Against all odds, he and those with him survived, while many of his co-workers above never escaped. Others became human chains, guiding strangers down the dark stairwells. Some carried colleagues who couldn't walk. Some stayed behind to help others, sacrificing their own chance at survival. Perhaps the most famous act of civilian heroism took place aboard United Airlines Flight 93. When passengers learned through phone calls that other hijacked planes had already struck the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, they understood their own fate. But instead of waiting, they acted. Led by passengers like Todd Beamer, whose words, "Let's roll," would become iconic, they stormed the cockpit in a desperate attempt to overpower the hijackers. The struggle was fierce, and in the end, the plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania, killing everyone aboard, but saving countless lives in Washington, D.C. Their bravery turned a story of terror into a story of sacrifice. For those who escaped, survival was only the beginning. Many carry physical scars, others emotional ones. The sound of alarms, the sight of planes, even the smell of smoke can bring the memories rushing back. One survivor, covered in dust and ash, later described walking through the streets of Manhattan as like the end of the world. Another said, "We were alive, but the city felt dead." For the families of the victims, the loss was immediate and permanent. Nearly 3,000 empty chairs would remain at dinner tables that night. Thousands of children lost a parent. Countless others lost friends, co-workers, loved ones. Yet even in the darkest moments, there was light. Stories of kindness, strangers helping strangers, lines of people donating blood, not knowing how many survivors would need it. Communities across America and across the world, pausing in grief, united in shock and sorrow. Because in tragedy, humanity revealed itself. The bravery of the firefighters, the sacrifice of passengers, the resilience of survivors, the compassion of strangers. These voices remind us that 9/11 was not only about destruction. It was about the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable terror. The dust was still settling in New York. The Pentagon was still burning. A field in Pennsylvania was scarred forever. But America, and the world, was only beginning to understand the scale of what had just happened. Lower Manhattan looked like a war zone. The Twin Towers, once the tallest buildings in New York, were gone. In their place was a smoldering pile of twisted steel, concrete, and ash, a sight that would forever be known as Ground Zero. The air was thick with smoke and dust. Papers from destroyed offices floated like confetti in the sky. Emergency vehicles clogged the streets. Survivors, covered in gray powder, stumbled through the chaos in shock. First responders kept digging, searching desperately for survivors. Shouts of "We found one" echoed through the rubble, followed by silence when the searches came up empty. For days, and then weeks, crews worked around the clock, but the miracle rescues were rare. Outside of New York, fear spread across the country. Air traffic controllers grounded every plane in U.S. airspace, nearly 4,500 aircraft, in an unprecedented shutdown of the skies. Cities evacuated skyscrapers, fearing more attacks. Bridges and tunnels were closed. The Pentagon, still burning from the crash of Flight 77, was evacuated as officials scrambled to secure Washington, D.C. At the White House, staff and reporters fled into the streets, worried it too might be a target. For hours, rumors swirled that bombs had gone off, that more planes were hijacked, that no one knew what would come next. Far from Washington, President George W. Bush was sitting in a Florida classroom when he received the devastating news. First, an aide whispered in his ear, "A second plane has hit the World Trade Center. America is under attack." Cameras captured his face as he processed the moment. Calm, but visibly shaken. Within hours, Bush was airborne aboard Air Force One, as security agencies feared even the president himself could be a target. Later that evening, he addressed the nation. "Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts." His words carried a mix of sorrow, resolve, and defiance, promising that those responsible would be hunted down. News of the attacks spread across the globe within minutes. From London to Tokyo, people crowded around televisions in disbelief. Images of the towers collapsing replayed endlessly, smoke, fire, and the sudden vanishing of an iconic skyline. In capitals worldwide, landmarks were lit in the colors of the American flag. Vigils were held. World leaders declared solidarity. NATO, for the first time in history, invoked Article 5. An attack on one member is an attack on all. But while sympathy was immediate, so too was the sense that the world had entered a new, uncertain era. Back in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania, families waited desperately for news. Thousands of missing posters appeared on city streets, faces of fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, co-workers, friends. At hospitals, lines of people stood ready to donate blood, though tragically, few survivors would arrive. For those who had lost loved ones, the grief was overwhelming. For those still searching, hope slowly turned into heartbreak. The night of September 11th, the usually buzzing streets of New York were eerily silent. Airports remained closed. Sports games were canceled. Even the New York Stock Exchange shut its doors. For the first time in modern memory, America simply stopped. Churches filled with people seeking comfort. Strangers hugged each other in the streets. Flags were hung from porches, balconies, and cars. A sense of unity, forged in tragedy, spread across the country. As the fires burned through the night and rescue workers kept searching, one question echoed everywhere. Who did this? It was a question that would define the next decades. But in the immediate aftermath, before blame was assigned, before wars were launched, America was a nation grieving, and a world still trying to comprehend what had just happened. The attacks were over. The towers had fallen. Nearly 3,000 lives had been lost. But this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of what would come next. In the hours and days after September 11th, confusion gave way to determination. The FBI, CIA, and intelligence agencies around the world raced to uncover who had orchestrated the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil. Very quickly, a name emerged, one that was already familiar to U.S. intelligence: Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden, born into a wealthy Saudi family, had once been seen by some as a hero during the Soviet war in Afghanistan. He funneled money, fighters, and resources to the Afghan resistance, gaining influence and followers. But by the 1990s, his ideology had hardened into something far darker. He founded a network called Al-Qaeda, meaning the base in Arabic. Its mission: wage holy war against the United States and its allies, whom bin Laden saw as corrupt occupiers of Muslim lands. From his base in Afghanistan, protected by the Taliban regime, bin Laden issued fatwas, religious decrees, calling for violence against America. In 1998, he declared it the duty of Muslims to kill Americans, both civilian and military, wherever they could be found. The world had been warned, but no one predicted the scale of what was coming. Investigators soon pieced together how 19 men carried out the attacks. They were divided across 4 flights, each with a specific role: pilots trained to fly the hijacked planes, and muscle hijackers to subdue the crew and passengers. Most were from Saudi Arabia. Others came from Egypt, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates. Many had lived quietly in the United States for months, even years. Some trained at American flight schools. Others blended into communities, unnoticed. They bought plane tickets, scoped airports, and rehearsed. The plan was meticulous, patient, and chillingly precise. Behind the logistics was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, often called KSM. He had presented the idea of using hijacked planes as weapons to bin Laden in the mid-1990s. Bin Laden approved. Funding was secured. Recruits were chosen. The plan moved forward. Cells of operatives slipped into the U.S., preparing silently for years until September 11, 2001. After the attacks, critics pointed to intelligence warnings that seemed to have been overlooked. In the summer of 2001, the CIA had warned of a possible Al-Qaeda strike. One memo, dated August 6, 2001, was titled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." But the warnings were vague. No one imagined commercial airplanes being turned into guided missiles. The system failed to connect the dots. Within weeks of the attacks, bin Laden appeared on video, denying responsibility. But as more evidence piled up, intercepted communications, captured operatives, financial trails, the picture was undeniable. Finally, in late 2001, bin Laden himself praised the attacks in a videotaped message. What the United States is tasting now is only a copy of what we have tasted. There was no more doubt. The world knew who had struck America and why. For bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, the motives were layered. Opposition to U.S. military presence in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War. Anger at American support for Israel. Hatred of Western influence in the Muslim world. To them, the Twin Towers were a symbol of American economic power. The Pentagon was military might. And Washington, D.C., the ultimate political target. By striking them, Al-Qaeda hoped to send a message that America was not untouchable. But what they unleashed was far beyond what they had calculated. As the evidence pointed directly to Al-Qaeda, President George W. Bush made it clear, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." The target was now obvious: Afghanistan, where Al-Qaeda leaders and the Taliban were hiding. The stage was set for a global war on terror that would dominate the 21st century. The faces of the hijackers had been revealed, the mastermind unmasked. The world knew who had done it. But the harder question was still to come: how would America respond? In the days after September 11th, America was not just grieving. It was preparing for war. President George W. Bush stood before Congress on September 20th, 2001, and declared, "Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated." The message was clear: the United States was ready to strike back. Intelligence confirmed that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were operating under the protection of the Taliban, the hardline Islamist regime controlling most of Afghanistan. The Taliban refused to hand bin Laden over. Their answer was simple: no. So, on October 7, 2001, less than a month after September 11th, America launched Operation Enduring Freedom. The skies over Afghanistan lit up with U.S. cruise missiles, bombers, and fighter jets. Military bases, training camps, and Taliban strongholds were hit with overwhelming force. By November, U.S. Special Forces and the CIA were on the ground, partnering with Afghan fighters from the Northern Alliance. Together, they advanced rapidly, toppling Taliban defenses. By December, the Taliban had collapsed. Kabul, Kandahar, and other major cities were under U.S. and Allied control. Bin Laden, however, slipped away, escaping into the mountains of Tora Bora. Despite massive bombing campaigns and special operations, he vanished into the rugged terrain. The war in Afghanistan had begun, but the man behind 9/11 was still free. The attack on Afghanistan was only the beginning. The Bush administration declared a global war on terror, a campaign without borders or time limits. American forces deployed to countries across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. New counterterrorism laws were passed. Security at airports and borders was tightened like never before. For ordinary Americans, the world had changed. Boarding a plane now meant body scans, metal detectors, and long security lines. The government created the Department of Homeland Security and passed the Patriot Act, granting sweeping powers to monitor communications and track suspects. Support for the war was overwhelming. Flags waved on every street. Military enlistment surged. A sense of unity and vengeance fueled the campaign. But soon, America's focus shifted. The Bush administration began warning that Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, possessed weapons of mass destruction and could support terrorists. Despite doubts and international opposition, the U.S. invaded Iraq in March 2003. Within weeks, Saddam's government fell. But no stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction were ever found. The war dragged on, becoming a bloody and divisive conflict. For many, the Iraq War overshadowed the original mission in Afghanistan, the pursuit of Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Even as U.S. troops fought in Iraq, the search for bin Laden continued. Intelligence agencies tracked his movements through Pakistan and Afghanistan. Rumors swirled. Was he hiding in a cave or living in luxury under protection? For nearly a decade, bin Laden remained a ghost. His tapes and messages surfaced occasionally, taunting America, but he remained out of reach. The frustration grew. Families of 9/11 victims demanded justice. Soldiers risked their lives in 2 wars, yet the mastermind of 9/11 was still free. By the mid-2000s, the war on terror had expanded across the globe. From drone strikes in Yemen, to operations in Somalia, to covert missions in Pakistan, the U.S. military footprint stretched wider than ever. But with each passing year, questions grew louder. How long would this war last? Was it making America safer, or creating more enemies? Still, the determination to bring bin Laden to justice never faded. And in 2011, a secret operation would finally change everything. For nearly 10 years, America had fought across deserts and mountains, spent trillions of dollars, and lost thousands of lives. But soon, in the dark of night, U.S. Navy SEALs would descend on a compound in Pakistan, and the man responsible for 9/11 would finally be found. For nearly 10 years after September 11th, Osama bin Laden remained America's most wanted man. His face was on FBI posters. His name dominated intelligence briefings. But despite the global manhunt, he vanished into the shadows. Some believed he was hiding in the remote mountains along the Afghan-Pakistani border. Others thought he had already been killed. Still, occasional video and audio tapes released by al-Qaeda proved he was alive, mocking America, praising attacks, and urging more violence. Every lead seemed to end in dead ends. Until 2010. That year, the CIA tracked a man believed to be one of bin Laden's trusted couriers. For years, U.S. intelligence had suspected that finding bin Laden's messengers might lead to him. And finally, it paid off. The courier led them to an unusual compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. From the outside, it looked like a large but ordinary house. But there were odd details. 18-foot-high walls topped with barbed wire. No internet or phone lines. Windows covered for privacy. And the residents burned their trash instead of leaving it out. The CIA watched for months. They didn't see bin Laden directly, but a tall figure, known as the Pacer, walked the grounds occasionally. Could it be him? The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. President Barack Obama faced a fateful decision. On April 29, 2011, after weeks of deliberation, Obama authorized a high-risk raid. The mission would be carried out by the Navy's most elite unit, SEAL Team 6. The risks were enormous. If bin Laden wasn't there, it would be an international disaster. If the raid failed, American lives could be lost deep inside Pakistan, a country not informed of the operation. But the order was given. The countdown began. On the night of May 1st, 2011, two Black Hawk helicopters lifted off from Afghanistan, carrying the SEALs toward Abbottabad. Flying low to avoid radar, the helicopters crossed into Pakistani airspace. The men inside were silent, tense, fully aware this could be a one-way mission. When they reached the compound, disaster struck. One of the Black Hawks lost lift and crash-landed inside the walls. No one was killed, but the noise risked alerting the neighborhood. The SEALs adapted instantly. They stormed the compound, blasting through doors with explosives, clearing rooms one by one. Women and children were ushered aside. Resistance was minimal. And then, on the third floor, they found him. Osama bin Laden, the man who had ordered the deaths of nearly 3,000 people on September 11th. In a matter of seconds, the SEALs opened fire. Bin Laden was shot and killed. The entire raid lasted only 40 minutes. The SEALs gathered intelligence, secured his body, and destroyed the crashed helicopter before exfiltrating. By the time they left Abbottabad, the world's most wanted terrorist was gone. Hours later, President Obama addressed the nation from the White House. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden. Celebrations erupted across America. Crowds gathered outside the White House, in Times Square, and at Ground Zero. People waved flags, sang, and cheered. For many, it was a moment of closure nearly a decade in the making. The death of bin Laden did not end terrorism. Al-Qaeda continued to operate. New extremist groups would rise. But for Americans, justice had been delivered. The man behind 9/11 was gone. The hunt was over. Bin Laden was dead. But the legacy of 9/11, the wars, the losses, the fear, and the questions, would continue to shape the world for decades to come. September 11th, 2001, is not just a date in history books. It is a scar that remains etched in memory. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives that day. Office workers, firefighters, police officers, passengers, and ordinary citizens who woke up to what they thought was just another Tuesday. For the families who lost loved ones, the pain never fully heals. Every anniversary brings back the images, the memories, and the empty chairs at dinner tables. Ground Zero, once a pile of rubble, is now home to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. Twin reflecting pools set in the footprints of the fallen towers, surrounded by the engraved names of the victims. A place of silence, reflection, and remembrance. But the legacy of 9/11 reaches far beyond New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. It reshaped the world. Air travel was forever changed, with strict security and TSA screenings becoming the new normal. Surveillance expanded as governments introduced new laws to track potential threats. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq would stretch for decades, costing trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives. Politics around the globe shifted as terrorism and counterterrorism became defining issues of the 21st century. Entire generations have now grown up in a world shaped by the aftermath of 9/11. Amid the tragedy, stories of courage continue to inspire. The firefighters who climbed the towers knowing they might not come back. The police officers who directed crowds to safety. The passengers of Flight 93 who fought back and prevented an even greater disaster. These acts of bravery are remembered not just as part of history, but as a reminder of the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. In the immediate aftermath, the United States came together in a way rarely seen before. Flags lined neighborhoods. Blood donation centers overflowed. Strangers comforted strangers. But as years passed, the legacy of 9/11 also brought division. Debates over wars, surveillance, civil liberties, and America's role in the world. The unity faded, replaced by political battles and difficult questions that still linger today. Each year, The phrase, "never forget," is repeated at memorials, on social media, and in classrooms. For some, it means honoring the victims. For others, it means remembering the heroism. And for many, it means learning the lessons of that day, to remain vigilant, but also to seek peace in a world scarred by violence. More than 2 decades later, the shadow of 9/11 still shapes global politics, security, and daily life. Yet its legacy is not just one of terror. It is also a story of resilience, of a city that rebuilt, of families that carried on, of a nation and a world that refused to let fear define the future. The skyline of New York now rises again, dominated by One World Trade Center, also known as the Freedom Tower, a symbol of both mourning and hope. September 11th will forever be remembered as a day of loss, but it is also remembered as a day of courage, unity, and resolve. And though the wounds of that morning may never fully heal, the legacy of those who were lost, and those who stood strong, will endure for generations to come. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our Trendify channel, where we always bring you amazing contents from true crime stories to historical contents and many more.